But today's daf is daf Ayin Gimel. And we start with the Mishnah towards the top of the Omud. Yayin nesach osir v'osir v'kolshu. Yayin b'yayin, mayim b'mayim, b'kolshu. However, yayin b'mayim, umayim b'yayin, is b'no sein tam. V'zeh klal, to summarize the whole Mishnah, min b'mino b'mashu, min b'shalom min mino b'no sein tam. So let's just overview this Mishnah. We're talking about Isur that gets mixed up into Heter, and we're not sure yet which fell into which, but let's say if we assume that the Yayin Nesech, which is Yayin Shel Isur, fell into Yayin Shel Heter, and whether or not it's Oser B'Kolshu and the whole Tarovas is Oser, or it's Oser only B'Nosein Tam, let's say in a ratio of 1 to 60, that depends whether it was min b'mino or min b'sheino mino. So yayin b'yayin is min b'mino, mayim b'mayim is min b'mino. Now, what would be the case of mayim? Mayim would be a case where the idolaters used water as a libation for their idols, and that mayim becomes osir b'non. It fell into regular permissible mayim. So that's a mixture of min b'mino, and in such a case it's also b'mashu. In the case of yayin b'mayim, let's say yayin nesach fell into mayim of heter, or mayim of nesach fell into yayin of heter. That's already min b'sheino mino, and it's also b'nosein tam in a relationship of 1 to 60. It's not exactly clear at this point whether the Mishnah or why the Mishnah felt compelled to add this klal at the end. It seems to be just a repetition of what it says at the beginning, but again, the Gemara is going to always derive some sort of extra mute from the addition of the klal. Ki asar Avdimi Omer Rav Yochanan. So Avdimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel with a tradition from Rabbi Yochanan, his Rebbe. Hama'ara yayin nesach michovetz lebar afilu kol hayom kulo rishon batel. So this is the principle called rishon batel, which is a very fundamental principle in Tarovos, the laws of mixtures, and that is that if he drops, let's say, small drops of wine, which is yayin nesach, yayin of isur, from a barrel, let's say, into a bar, and presumably what we have inside the bar is yayin shel heter, then with each drop that falls, we have bittul. Now, this doesn't sound like our Mishnah, because our Mishnah assumes that yayin b'yayin is min b'mino and it's also b'mashu. So we'll have to figure out how Rav Dimi would be reconciled with our Mishnah. But leave that on the side for a minute. The point of Rabbi Yochanan is that every drop into itself is batel, because there's a large amount of yayin shel heter on the bottom in the bar. And then it doesn't matter how much yayin of nesach eventually will accumulate inside the bar. It's irrelevant. You could even have a scenario where most of the wine in the bar is yayin nesach, but it doesn't matter. Every single drop as it falls is batel. And that's called rishon batel. So now the Gemara is going to ask the kash from our Mishnah. Tanan, we learned today Mishnah, yayin nesach asur v'osur v'kolshu. In other words, when you have yayin shel nesach, yayin isur that fell into yayin shel heter, that's called min b'mino, and we said that a tarovas of min b'mino is asur b'mashahu. My lavdika nofel isur l'go hetera, meaning the case of the Mishnah, no doubt, is a case where yayin of nesach fell into yayin of heter, and since it's min b'mino, the Mishnah paskins that's also b'mashu, whereas Rav Dimi, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, said that in such a case, every drop is batel. Now, honestly, I don't know the answer to this question. It seems to me that the Gemara could have just very simply deflected this kasha by saying that the Mishnah is talking about a case where all of the wine of nesach fell in one fell swoop into the yayin of heter, like the whole barrel fell in at once, as opposed to the case of Rav Dimi in the name of Rav Yochanan, where drops fell one drop at a time. But in any event, the Gemara maybe feels it has a better answer to reject this challenge. Lo de kanofil heter legoi surah. What the Mishnah is talking about is yayin b'yayin means yayin of heter fell into yayin of isur. So if we take Rabbi Yochanan's principle and apply it in this case, then Rishon Bato, which means that every drop of yayin shel heter, as it falls into the yayin of isur, becomes batel and becomes asur. And even if you get to the point, as we said earlier, where most of the wine in this mixture, after so many drops of wine have fell in, is now yain of heter, it doesn't matter because rishon batel. So each drop of wine, as it falls into the yain shel isur, to the yain nesach on the bottom, becomes batel and takes on the status of yain shel isur. So the Gemara now is going to raise another objection from our Mishnah against Rav Dimi in the name of Yochanan Tashma. The Mishnah says, Yayin b'mayim b'nosein tam. Now, once again, the impression you get here is that the yayin is the yayin nesach, which is the iser. And it fell into mayim, it fell into water, which is heter. My love, the kanofil chamra, the isura, which is yayin nesach, l'maya detera, to permissible water. And the Mishnah says that it all depends in that case because it's min b'sheno mino and no saint tam. But one second, according to you, Rav Dimi, what should come out from this is that each drop of yayin shel iser that falls into mayim should be batel. And then it's irrelevant whether it's no saint tam because once it's batel, it can only give a tam of heter because it became heter. And this is the principle of Isur Nefach Lios Heter. Lo, that's not the case. The case is the Nofil Chamra de Teru L'mayad Isura. It was the mayim that was used for a libation for Avoda Zara, not the yayin. The yayin itself is Heter. So the yayin of Heter now falls into mayim of Isur, and it's kama bottle. Every drop of wine of Heter that falls into the yayin of nesech, of isur, is now batel, takes on the status of yayin nesech, and therefore, once again, it's irrelevant. The story of kama batel is being used here lechumra, because once again, what we're talking about is a wine that was mutter, and it was batel in the mayim of libation, Maya Disura. So that fits in very beautifully with Rabbi Yochanan. The only problem is, as the Gemara is going to raise right now, is that you're splitting up the Reisha and the Seifa in almost a contradictory way. Why? The Reisha, in the first case, where we spoke about Yayin B'mayim, right? We said that it's Maya de Isura, right? The Yayin was Heter, falling into Mayim of Isur, and it was Patel. Then Sefer Nami, if you want to maintain the integrity of this Mishnah, then you say the Sefer should also be a case where it says Mayim be Yayin, that it should be a case of Mayim de Isura, just like you had in the Reisha, you had Yayin de Isura falling into Mayim de Tera. The Sefer should be Mayim de Isura that fell into Yayin de Hetera. Uktani Sefer, and yet if we assume in the Sefer that we're talking about Mayim de Isura, that was Mayim that was used as a libation that fell into Heter, and yet Ketani Sefer Mayim B'yayin B'nosein Tam. Why should it be Mayim B'yayin B'nosein Tam if the Mayim should be Batel as soon as it falls into the Yayin of Hetera? Rav Dimi says Kula Masnisin Hetera L'go Isura. we're going to assume that in each case in the Mishnah, whether it's the Reish or the Seifa, it was Heter that fell into Isur. And what's the difference between the Reish and the Seifa? Reisha the Kanofil Chamral Heter L'maydi Surah. In the Reisha, the Yayin that fell into the Mayim was Yayin de Hetera, into Mayim di Surah. So the libation water is on the bottom. And therefore the Hetera is Botel, according to the principle of Rabbi Yochanan in the Isur. So every drop of Chamra de Hetera becomes Isura. And the Sefer is the called Nofil Mayim de Hetera L'Chamra di Isur. So it's always the Heter on top falling into the Isur on the bottom. And therefore the Heter on top is Botel to the Isur on the bottom. Hence, we understand very well why the Tarovis is also in both cases. In the first case, Chamra de Hetera is Botel, because every drop that falls in is Botel to the Mayim di Isura. And in the second case, the Mayim Be'etera becomes Isura because every drop of water that falls into the Yayin di Isura is Botel to the Yayin di Isura. So all this is the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Kiyasa Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yosef from Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yitzchak comes from Babel Teretz Yisrael with a different tradition in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Hama'ara Yayin Nesech Mitzarzur Koton. Tzartzur is a jug or a pitcher. Lebar Afilu Kol Yom Kulo Rishon Botel. So this again is similar to what we said in Rav Dimi in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Now it's Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yosef in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, applying the principle of Rishon Botel. So the Yain Nesech coming out of this pitcher into a bar of presumably Yain Shel Heter, then it's Botel. Every drop that comes out of the Tzartzur Koton of Yain Nesech is Botel. It becomes Heter. However, Rabbi Yitzchak makes the following qualification. He says, Dafka Tzartzur Koton de lo Nofesh Amudei. Whereas Rav Dimi, when he quoted Rabbi Yochanan of Rishon Botel, he never qualified it. But Rabbi Yitzchak qualifies Rav Yochanan's heter, and he says it only applies where the spout is a very narrow spout, and therefore very little wine is coming out, and every drop of wine of Yain Nesech that comes into the bar is Botel. Aval Chavis, the Nafesh Amudei, lo, right? The spout of a barrel is much larger, and we're not going to apply this heter of Rishon Botel. So it means that according to the tradition of Rav Yitzchak Bar Yosef, although he agrees with Rav Dimi that even if there's min b'mino, like for example, Yayin Nesach into Yayin Shel Heter, or Mayim of Nesach into Yayin Shel Heter, we could always apply the kula of Rishon Botel. However, Rabbi Yitzchak limits this principle where the Isa that falls in came from a very small spout, a narrow spout, in which case the Isura that's falling out from the narrow spout, one drop at a time, is Botel in the Heter. But if the Isura is being poured from a larger barrel with a larger, wider spout, then we're viewing it not as coming out drop by drop, because the spout allows the entire wine or mayim to come out at once, and therefore we're going to view it according to the tradition of Yitzchak as if all of the yayin fell in at once, and therefore we cannot apply the principle of kama botel, but rather we'll apply the principle of beno seitam. So once again, the nafkamina between Rav Dimi's transmission of Rabbi Yochanan and that of Rabbi Yitzchak is whether or not Rabbi Yochanan would apply lekula his principle of kama botel, even in a case of a larger spout, where we expect that more and more of the wine will come out in one shot. Ki also Ravin Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Now we have a third tradition from Bavel, this time not in the case of Rav Dimi or Rav Yitzchak, but rather in the Talmud of Rabbi Yochanan called Ravin, Ravin and Rav Dimi were amongst the greatest Talmidim of Rav Yochanan. We in Bavel received the Torah of Rav Yochanan through mostly Rav Dimi and Ravin. Ravin came and he said, in the name of Rav Yochanan, Yayin Nesach Shenafal Lebar. So we now have Yayin of Isur falling into Yayin of Heter. V'nafal Sham Kiton Shal Mayim. Oh, now we're getting into a very, very heavy sugya. We'll try to do the best we can with the tools that we have. Right? Okay, this is called Marba Olav Umatiro, Umavatlo. Okay, so what happens now? You now have Yain Nesach falling into Yain of Heter. And now, in addition to that, what falls into this mixture? Nafal Sham Kiton Shalmayim. So we have a whole jug of water that fell in. Obviously, the water is Heter. And now we have two choices. There are two ways we could go over here. And Ravin is going to quote Rav Yochanan as being committed to one of these two ways. Let's just go over the two possible ways. Intuitively, we would say that the yayin of Isa that falls into the yayin of Heter is automatically bata. Now, what that means is that we isolate our first stage discussion with the min b'mino. Now, since it's min b'mino, we're going to say that min b'mino afilu be'elef lo batel. And now, by the time you get to the mayim that falls in, you've already converted everything in the yayin to isur. And the mayim doesn't have the volume and the capacity to now be mevatel the yayin. That's one way of saying it. Another way of saying it is, let's forget about the yayin that's mixing with the yayin. Let's first assume the yayin is mixing with the mayim. Therefore, the yayin of nesach is batel and it's mutter, and therefore, when it falls into the other yayin, it cannot generate an isur. And that's called, in the lashon of Rabbi Yochanan, roem es haheta kilu eno, vashar marbim mayim ravim olav vatlan also. So what we could do is we can isolate the yayin and then marbe olav mayim. Because the other possibility would be, just 1 second, that the yayin nesech generates an isur on the yayin shel heter. But now Rabbi Yochanan is going to say no, that the yayin nesech is nullified by the mayim, and that's called mayim marbim olav umevatlim also. Once you mevatel the yayin nesech, then everything is mutter. However, who disagrees? Ki osir of Shmuel bar Yehuda Rabbi Yochanan. Now we have a fourth quote in the name of Rabbi Yochanan from Bavel Teretz, from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel. Lo shanu ela shenafal kiton shamayim tchila. Okay, that's very good. If the kiton shamayim of Heter fell in first, and then you have the yayin nesach that's coming into this mixture against the mayim, so then I understand very well that Rabbi Yochanan's principle of marbe olav mevatlin oso could apply. But if lo nafal sham kiton shamayim tchila, then motzam minas mino v'niyah. If we put aside the mayim, because the mayim hasn't fallen in yet, so we only have yayin coming into yayin, and that's min b'mino, which is afilu b'mashu is also. So then all the wine now becomes also. There's not enough mayim that comes in from this keton to be mevatel the yayin. So basically, Rav Shmuel is limiting the principle of Rabbi Yochanan of marbim ravim olav vatlano, so only to the case where the mayim came in first. And when you think about it, if the mayim came in first, the chiddush of Rabbi Yochanan here is not sensational. It's almost intuitive. that the mayim came first, it overwhelms the yayin nesech. The yayin nesech becomes heter, and now the whole mixture is heter. But again, just to emphasize that Ravin went a step further. And according to Ravin, it doesn't matter when the mayim fell in. We could be marba the mayim against the yayin, because there's that much more water than there is yayin. So we'll basically freeze the process of converting the yayin shel heter into yayin shel iser, freeze it, let the water come in, and the water will be mevatel the yayin nesach. That's Rav Dimi. I'm sorry, that's Ravin. According to one opinion, we go back to Rav Yitzchak Bar Yehuda, and he made a comment on our Mishnah. It says in our Mishnah, Yayin b'yayin kolshu. Wine and wine is min b'mino, and therefore as is b'kolshu. Comes along Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. He says, Lo shanu ela shelo nafal sham kiton shel mayim. Aval nafal sham kiton shel mayim. Romas haheta ki ilu eno. Right, let's put aside the mayim shel heter, because otherwise we're going to have to convert it into yayin nesech, and then we won't be able to be mevatel it based on the limited volume of water. But we're going to now put the yayin shel heter in deep freeze, so to speak, so that we can postulate a battle, so to speak, a confrontation between the mayim of heter and the yayin nesech. Is therefore vashar marbin olav umevatlin oso. So basically, what we could sum up now, according to the Ika Demasni Leamasnisin, is that Rav Shmuel Bar Yehud is basically repeating what eventually we have from Ravin in the name of Rav Yochanan. My Ika bein Demasli Amasnisin bein Demasli ad Ravin. Right, what difference it make whether you say that this was taught as Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda's statement qualifying the Mishnah, or whether you say his statement was in reference to Ravin. If we put Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda's comment on the Mishnah, it doesn't matter which came first, whether the wine came in or the mayim came in. But if on the other hand we put Rav Shmuel Bar Yitzchak's statement as a contrast or as a disagreement with Ravin, then we're going to say about Rav Yitzchak Bar Yehuda that by Tchila he requires, like we saw in the name of Shmuel, that first the mayim comes in, so the order becomes significant. Itmar, we learned Yayin Nesach Shenafal Lebar V'Nafal Sham Kiton Shal Mayim.